So part two of this is and I'm going to read it quickly. It says, photography gave me a voice, a way to say things that I couldn't say with words. When I was 18, 19, 20 years old, I had a difficult time saying what I felt. And sometimes I acted out. I did a lot of dumb things, like, stole the car and ran away to Missouri and did nutty things. But photography it helped me connect, the feelings that I have. And it gave me a way to express those things. Very, very important to me at that time. And I'm not alone in this. I realize this. When I read the stories of Gordon Parks or people like Gordon, I realize that photography has been something very magical for a lot of young people, and a lot of people who kind of don't fit in, a lot of people who are not great students. They find that photography allows them to really connect with people in a way that they couldn't do orally or with a written word. So when I think about it, photography became more than just a camera, and it became more than just, something to do. It really was like a friend and a companion to me. When you go through something really difficult in life, and everybody does, we all do it. And if you go through something difficult when you're very young, like the loss of my mother and the flood, there's a loneliness within you. There's a hole in your heart that you're trying to fill all the time. And I think that photography became that for me. It really became, it almost took on this life, bigger than life, companionship. And it also gave me a reason to talk to strangers and ask questions. I was pretty shy. I know I acted out a lot, but I was generally pretty shy. And I wouldn't go up to talk to somebody unless I really had a reason. I've never been a kind of a person to go someplace and stand around and just make small talk and hold a drink or something. I've never been good at that, and nor do I want to be good at that. But photography gave me, it's like I had a license. And I tell sometimes it was as though I had a big S on my chest and it said, I'm Superman. And I believed that. When I had a camera, I would approach anybody. I would climb any mountain. I would hang out of an airplane. I would do things that I would never do without a camera. And it also gave me a license to study others' grief, which is really important. When you go through difficult times, again, and I know that all of us have, and of the 70 or 80 or 100 people that are listening, you can probably pinpoint a time in your life that was really tough, and that you were kind of groping to understand. And I think for me, to try to understand grief, particularly when watching my mother die, it was really important. And the camera allowed me to get close. It allowed me to actually to come as close to death as I could without actually experiencing it. I would be able to interact and watch and see people in their grief, and it taught me a lot. And then it gave me a purpose. At 17, my purpose was to run away from society and to live in the woods and build a cabin and hunt bears or whatever that meant, that ridiculous dream. But after the flood, and I started using the camera more to express myself and to really study the world, I realized that there was a real life purpose with this. It didn't feel accidental. It really felt like, okay, this was the way it was meant to be. And it also gave me an education that was different than the education that you would receive sitting in a classroom. People often say, well, you weren't educated. Well, I very much was educated. I was educated by life. I was educated by stories and being in the streets and traveling in different countries and working in different environments. I learned so much. When you have to do stories, you do the research. You want to know the people before you get there. So it's a tremendous education. I suggest anybody, if you can go work at a newspaper, and it's particularly a small newspaper, you're going to receive an education that you're not going to receive anywhere else. And it introduced me to people and cultures that I never would have gone to. I mean, at 17, I didn't dream of going to Italy or Israel or Norway or places like this. I just would never have gone there. I mean, I just wanted to go up in the hills and take my coon dogs and go hunting. I didn't want to do any of those things. And I realize now that it expanded my whole horizon, my whole vision of the world. And I would understand people so much better. So photography was a gift from God to help me survive, and then to reach out and to help others. And I tell people all the time, one of the greatest gifts that we have, I would say that hardship brings, or even, I guess I would use the term tragedy even sometimes, when we survive tragedies, then we should gain some empathy. We should have a better understanding of how other people live and what they're going through. And once we understand that, then there should, that should be followed by really a desire to want to help people. And we do it in different ways. Somebody asked me just yesterday, they were asking me, said, well, what are you doing right now to help people that you're somewhat confined? And I said, well, I continue writing this blog. I said, it's no big deal, but it's just one seed, in a giant field. And if everybody plants one seed in a field, we're going to have a giant field of hope. So everybody participates and does something to help other people. This is the picture that Fran Gardler shot of me. It's always one of my favorite pictures because I love this little lady, and she was on the street and she ended up dying. Her name was Karen, and Karen was she wanted so bad to get off the streets, and she never did make it. Part 3, I think, and this is when I say this is, I'm just going to remind all of you that are listening, this is not about me, and this is not why I'm doing this, because it's really not about me. I don't care about, it's not like, here's my portfolio, this is what I do. I hope that you are understanding this is really about you. When I say know thyself, I'm saying for me to know myself, it took me a lot of years to figure out what am I doing and how do I use a camera to express what I'm doing? And how do I use the camera to make the world better in my own way? So it's really that old question, that age-old question is know thyself. So when I started out, like anybody, I was a generalist. I was working at the paper and I photographed football games and baseball games and photographed basically, car accidents, whatever happened. When I was 21, I was offered a job to travel the world and just shoot sports. I mean, it was an amazing opportunity, 21, and I turned it down because I knew that that wouldn't satisfy me. My life was not going to be about just photographing sports. There were so many other things that I wanted to do and stories that I wanted to tell. When I was in Alaska, I worked up at Alaska Magazine for a little while and photographed the, wildlife up on the North Slope, and, caribou and king eider ducks and things. And it was beautiful. And I've always loved nature, but I'm not a nature photographer any more than I'm a sports photographer, and I love doing pictorials. I love going out, I'm not Ansel Adams. I'm not going to, when I go out and I photograph the land early in the morning when I was in California, which I just love photographing the land, that's my escape. It's sort of my private domain where I can go out and just commune with nature but that's not going to be my life either. I'm never going to be a nature photographer. In our job, we get to photograph a lot of different celebrities, a lot of famous people, but I'm not a celebrity photographer, and I never have wanted to be. I'm a storyteller. It took me a while to realize it. It probably took me 30 or 40 years to finally really understand what that meant. And that means whether it's with, whether it's orally or whether it's with the written word or whether it's with photographs or hopefully with all three, I'm a storyteller. And that's sort of my purpose, my mission in life. This is one of the first stories that I did about a friend, his name was Brownie. It was, not received real well by some people because they thought it was too real, too raw, too direct. And yet I felt like that's what stories should be. They should be representative of the people and what they're going through. And Brownie and I had this agreement from the beginning. He had colon cancer, and hopefully he would overcome it, but he didn't. And we had an agreement that no matter what happened, that I would stay with it and we would stay photographing it. I look back, this is 50 years ago, or 45 years ago at least. Those are very real pictures. Now, what I tell people is that you didn't see stories like this very often in 1969 or 1970 or 71 or 72. They're a lot more common now. And I think that was why this story was nominated for a Pulitzer by somebody from Boston. It didn't win. I understood it might have been close, but it didn't win. But it's unimportant. It was a story a real story about somebody in our community and what they were going through, what they were living through. But these are the kind of photographs that I realized that, whether it's you know, a group of photographs, whether it's, you know, 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 photographs, or if it's a single photograph, the objective always is to communicate for me. It's always to tell story. You know, I've cut this down to 3 pictures. A project, not a project, it was a story called Forever Friends, about 2 dogs that were playmates, and they were running and playing on the, you know, out in the middle of the country roads in Kansas, and one of them got hit by a car and the other one didn't understand why his friend wasn't playing anymore. People would say, well, you know, we ran that as a full page in a newspaper. Probably wouldn't do that today, but it was important because that's part of what the community is. Once again, the idea is there's a story here. In a single photograph, there's a story. And what I tell people all the time when I think about story, I learned this, that to me, a story in a photograph is either it's cause and effect in one photograph. It's not, you know, a cause in one picture, then an effect in another. It's cause and effect in the same photograph. It's action and reaction in the same photograph. You know, simple things. These aren't famous people. These aren't from famous events. These are everyday lives. You know, I tell people, you know, most of our lives are made up of millions of really small events. You know, yes, we could probably point to, you know, 4 or 5 big events in our life, when, you know, the birth of a child or a marriage or something, you know, but most of our life is really composed of these really small but yet meaningful moments. And that's what I'm always looking for. Part 4 is about photographic influences. You know, I asked my students probably at least 15 or 20 years ago, I was talking to a class, and I asked them, I said, whose work do you look at? You know, what do you read? What goes into your mind, through your eyes, into your heart? Who's influencing you? And finally, at the end of the class, somebody raised their hand and said, well, who influenced you? And I went, ooh, I never really thought about that. So I said, I have to think about that. And I decided I'm going to look that up, and I'm going to think about who are my photographic influences. And I was a little surprised at what I realized. Number one, my greatest influence was the Dutch painter Rembrandt. Rembrandt had a great influence on me because I would look through these books and I would look at the way that he used light. It wasn't just, you know, he taught me how to see and feel light, not just see it, but to feel light. He understood that very early, you know. And so I was influenced by that. Maybe I probably didn't sit down at 25 years old and write down, gee, I'm influenced by Rembrandt. But later in life, I realized when I started looking at my photographs and how I looked at the world, boy, he had a lot of influence on me. And then Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell had tremendous influence on me. You know, I grew up, my grandmother had a real small house in California, and there was one bathroom. And I can remember going in there since I was big enough to walk, probably 3 or 4 years old. You'd go in this bathroom, you close the door, and one wall was pictures of cats. She just loved cats. She had all these cats on the sides of the wall. And the other side was the covers of the Saturday Evening Post of Norman Rockwell. So, you know, from 3 years old to about 20 probably, I was sort of getting these subliminal messages like, okay, you're either going to like cats or you're going to like Rockwell. Well, I gravitated toward Rockwell, clearly. And so he was influencing me subtly, even though I didn't even realize at the time. Until I started making pictures when I was probably 19 or 20 years old. A lot of my pictures, I was naturally making these pictures that looked like Norman Rockwell's pictures. It was within me. Because he taught me how to laugh with my camera and to see story, humor, and paradox in everyday life. I'm always looking for that. You know, people say, well, you know, you end up, you know, you shoot all of these really funny, silly pictures of the time, and then you do these things that are really hard pictures of grief. And I said, well, but, you know, I always say humor is grief's twin. I mean, you can't have one without the other. I love, you know, Rockwell was such a great influence to me. And he didn't do just, you know, a lot of people kind of poo-pooed him and said, well, he's an illustrator. He's not a real artist and stuff. And yet he was one of the most popular artists ever in, you know, in the history of the world. But he also painted sermons. He's painted, stories that cause us to take a deep look at us, at ourselves. He did this more later in life. And then I would tell you, and this, when I tell people this, when I say that Jesus Christ was one of my greatest influences as a photographer, I'm separating this from a spiritual following, from a spiritual belief. What I'm talking to you today is, you want to learn about storytelling, you want to really understand storytelling, look at the teachings of Christ, and you'll learn how to tell a story. No storyteller has taught me more about compassion than Jesus. Nobody. And so my photographs, I hope they reflect this, and I think they do. I think people, if they look at your photographs long enough, are going to say, I can see a theme to your work. I can see that you really do have, you maybe even have an agenda. You're trying to accomplish something. Yes, it is. I am trying to accomplish something. I want to celebrate good. I want to celebrate love. I want people to think about how they treat each other. I want people to think about, why are we here and where are we going? And I want people to think about those things. Interesting enough, when I started studying this, that Rembrandt and Rockwell were also influenced by Jesus, which again, is the greatest storyteller. If you look at this picture that Rembrandt did, this is, the prodigal son, his Rembrandt's interpretation of that. And then you look at Rockwell's work and you see a very similar theme. Once again, it's a father and a son. There's a little bit of tension. One, the son is leaving, but those are very similar things. Most of my photography is influenced by these master storytellers. Most of what I do today, it's not that we don't do other things, but that's really what I do. When I look at photographs like this, it reminds me of It's a Wonderful Life. When a father comes home from war and he surprises his daughter at a choral presentation there. These are the moments that I live for. Or a father, embracing his son after a Little League All-Star game where his son struck out to end the game, and the father goes out in the field and he embraces him and tells him it's going to be all right. Well, just the relationships like this. Within all these, there's stories. Each one of us as a photographer, we have a different signature. We do different things. David Kennelly's photographs are very different, than I would say than Carol Guzzi's, even to some degree, or other photographers that are popular right now. My photographs, for the most part, are always very quiet. They're very quiet, subtle moments. One of my favorite people ask me all the time, you photographed all these famous people. What's the best subject you've had? What's your best picture? And I said, the picture, the person that I've most enjoyed photographing more than anybody was really was Coach John Wooden. I don't think I've ever photographed anybody that I spent a couple of days with that I cared about more, or that it taught me more, and that I felt more of a connection to. I don't have time to tell you about all these photographs. If you want to, you can ask me later and we'll talk about them. What I'm trying to get you to see is just a recognition of light and a recognition of these moments, and how that each one of them has its own story. I love this. This is something Rockwell would have painted. And I have to stop here and tell you this quickly. One of my students at Kent State was named Eric Lauer. Eric Lauer, a nice guy, wonderful baseball player. And we talked baseball, we talked photography in class. And he'd tell me that he was hoping that he would get drafted high. And if he did, he might even take some money and buy a lot of photographs. But one thing I asked him at one of the classes, I said, I want you to do a short video piece on somebody that you admire. And he did this wonderful piece on his father Rick, who was also an athlete and who encouraged his son. And they had this wonderful relationship. And so when Eric ended up being drafted in the first round by the San Diego Padres, I was there with him. And I just love this moment of, you know, being hugged by his father. It all sort of culminated in that moment. And his father, Rick, had some serious health issues. And so when Eric ended up going to San Diego, he was only in the minors a year, and then San Diego brought him up, and he's still pitching there for the Padres. His dad was able to see him, you know, realize his dream, and that, you know, his son was pitching in the major leagues, and then he died about a year later. And so I've always been thankful that I had this moment. And a lot of my pictures are relational. I mean, they're relationships between, a lot of times between fathers and sons. This is my father. A few years ago, he died about a year and a half ago. I always called this the last cowboy because he was one of a kind. And then toward the end here, part 5 is Bridges and Angels. I have to mention this because we have these moments, I think most of us in our life, what we call our, you know, pivotal moments. And there's other terms. Some people, you know, transitional moments would be another term. What happens is, you know, we're going along, and then something strikes us, and it causes us to really reevaluate our lives and think about what we're doing. And I had one of those times. I had one of those moments about 20 years ago. I was back in Ventura, and I had asked the newspaper if I could write a column about homeless people, in which we were doing. I think we called it Hard Times. And as I was going out and interviewing people that were having a difficult time, that were homeless, with the hopes of getting them help, I'd heard about a woman named Deanna Morales who they said I think her husband was in prison, and I think her son was in prison. She worked, I believe, for the county. She had a job, but she basically was homeless, and she couldn't pay for her car. She was in a terrible straits. So I went out to visit her after I'd heard about her and set up an appointment. And I was talking to Deanna, and I remember it was summertime. It was really bright, and we were out talking. And she had brought her granddaughter. And when I was there, about 15 minutes into the interview, her granddaughter looks up at and she says, "Grandma," I said, "Are you crying?" And I interrupted and said, "No, Grandma's not crying." I said, "It's just so bright out here. It's probably hurting her eyes." But then Deanna says, "No, Grandma is crying." And then I thought, "Oh boy, why?" And so she says, "Grandma, why are you crying?" And then Deanna says, "I'm crying because God sent me an angel." And boy, it struck me then what we do, what we're able to do. We don't even realize the power that we have sometimes with photographs and with words to really change people's lives, to make their lives better. And I think from that point on, I think this mission was accelerated for me, that I decided that, I can't imagine somebody calling me an angel, but to be serving in that role, to be able to bring somebody help and comfort, that's what I want to do, and that's what I want to continue doing. And so I started writing the blog Bridges and Angels, and I started trying to find other ways to do this. And and thanks to Deanne, because she really changed my life, probably more than she realizes. So, and from this, I'll tell you quickly, is that I wrote the book. It's called Bridges and Angels: The Story of Ruth. After so many years of thinking about it and talking about it and living it, I decided that I wanted to write a book that had a different ending than my real life. And that's why I wrote this book. Even though it probably 3/4 of it is nonfiction, it does have a fictional ending. It has an ending that I felt I could live with. And the reason I mention this at all in this talk today is that these things are all connected. 51 years ago, I was in a flood. 51 years ago, my mother died. 51 years ago, I started in photojournalism accidentally almost. I started working at a newspaper as a lab man, and then I ended up, the day I graduated from high school, they said, "We want to hire you full time." So I started in newspapers very young. All these things are intertwined. They all work together. And this book is really about photojournalism. And it's about a way to celebrate my mother's life and to celebrate all these things that we've done. This is she was a pretty lady when she was young. This is me on the far left and my sister on the right. And I put this in here for a reason here. And I use it, if I was there live with you, and maybe I could even ask this question here, you could raise your hand. How many people know who made this picture? You know, every time I've asked this question in a group, I've had a variety of answers, but nobody's ever got it right. It's because it's not a real famous picture, and we wouldn't even know who made this picture. But there's a point to it. If I ask you who made this picture, you would know, wouldn't you? I think everybody would say, oh, it looks like Ansel Adams. Well, and you would be right. But guess what? This is Ansel Adams too. But this wasn't the authentic Ansel Adams. This was. We do a lot of things. We make a lot of different kinds of pictures. But what we want to ask ourselves is, who is the authentic person? What is it that we do that nobody else can do? What can you do that nobody else can do? Nobody else can give to this world. So I'm asking you, how has photography changed your life? I've opened up a little bit and gave you a hint on how my life has been changed. But how has it changed your life? And my final question to you is, what will you do with the gifts that God has blessed you with? Because there's the charge. Each one of us, as long as we have life and we can think and we can breathe, we have all these talents. We should never get bored. We have so much opportunity and so many good things that we can do with the camera and with our words and with our person. All right, that's the end of it. I'm not talking anymore. I'm going back to off this, stop my share screen. I'm back. Now we have a lovelier face to look at.
Excellent. So are you ready for some questions and things then?
Absolutely. I'd rather have questions.
All right. So go ahead and ask questions in the chat. We can also experiment with letting you guys talk. We'll see how that goes, but let's start with the chat. So
I'm reading comments as well.
Yes, good.
I'm impressed those of you on the West Coast are awake. Most of, if you're students, you're not usually up before the crack of noon. So this is really something.
Right. I'm impressed how many of my students are here. Yay. Good for you guys. Something that really struck me that I've talked with my students a lot about is this idea of, action and reaction, but I hadn't really thought about it so clearly, this idea of having them both in the same image. That's a really interesting, I think, important idea to think about how we get that.
I think what I was saying though is I've been studying stories, since I was probably 18 or 19 years old, and I started really thinking about story and how we tell stories probably when I was in my 30s, and that's why I say, for me, when I read the Gospels or even when I read the Old Testament, when I read those stories, how does someone communicate what happened in a short amount of space? And so, the techniques that you find in writing are the techniques that we can also be employed in photography. So I'm continually trying to say, how do I best tell this story? Is it best told with words? Is it best told with pictures? Is it best told with audio? I don't know. So we have to keep studying. I saw Kurt Chandler ask me a question. I didn't see where it went.
Kurt asked you to tell us what the work you're doing now in Ohio.
Wow, what I'm doing is I'm continuing to write this blog. I did take a hiatus from somewhat being, I started to say I was retired. When I left Kent State, I was sort of retired, and that didn't last very long because my wife said she didn't want me sitting on the porch and doing nothing. I wasn't going to do that anyway because I like writing now. I actually like writing more than I like photography. And so I'm always writing something. I write a monthly column for Rural Light magazine, and I write feature articles for them. I write other feature articles. I'm going to continue working on books. But I took a break because I wanted to work with the Campbellsville University in Kentucky. I spoke there last year, and we had such a great experience that I decided that I wanted to build 2 photo classes that were really based on faith. And so one of the classes was called Faith in Photography, and the other one is called, well, they called it phototherapy, but it's really therapeutic photography. And so they, after some conversations and a lot of help from some people like Stan and Joan, we were able to develop those classes, and they were just starting. We only had a week, and so I met 3 times with the students, and I thought this is going to be so wonderful because I'm able to have the freedom to speak about my faith when I'm talking about photography. And as I was doing it, then the virus came, and then they shut the school down, and then everything went online. And so I'm glad I can still talk to my students online, but it's not the same as being there physically. So that's what I'm doing, Kurt, more than anything. Is I'm still teaching, I'm still writing, I still make pictures every day, still trying to figure out ways to be more of a blessing on the world than a curse.
So I may butcher her name, but Aaliyah has asked, can you talk about how we can be critical of our own images to tell if it has both action and reaction?
How we can be critical? Well, I mean, it depends on who you're showing the images to. First of all, everybody's going to react to an image differently. Now, I think it was Bresson that said that, it depends on what intellectual baggage you have, what you bring to a photograph. I'm going to give you a really hard example, but it's the clearest one I have right now. I remember talking about it to a woman who she couldn't look at duct tape. She could not go to the store and look at a roll of duct tape because her child was murdered and they were wrapped in duct tape. And that was what she saw. So that image was going to, forever trigger something within her. And so it depends, it's sort of like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It depends on who's looking at the photograph. Now, if you show it to me or, to Regina or Kurt Chandler or Mark Johnson, anybody who's a photography teacher, they're going to respond pretty quickly to whether or not they see a story in there. Do I understand what's happening? Do I have does it pique a curiosity in me? Does it make me want to know more about that person? So that as teachers, we're probably going to say, does it communicate? I've always said the difference between, art and photojournalism is, art is sort of I think sometimes it's sort of, I don't know, I think people are talking about themselves a lot. It's sort of self-indulging. Whereas photojournalism, the concept is I want to communicate with somebody. I'm trying to create something that talks to somebody in a way that they can understand it. So communication is the operative word. Whereas in art, self-expression is probably more the primary goal. Not always, and that's oversimplified that I know, but at least there's a difference. So, if you show me a photograph and if I don't have any sense of what's happening, then it probably doesn't have a story to it. One thing, if you study the work of Norman Rockwell used he used a lot of visual aids. He would, whether it was a little bit of writing on a blackboard or a piece of paper on the floor that had somebody's name on it, he gave you a lot of little bits and pieces of information, much like a detective. Like, you're looking at clues. What I try to do in my photographs is when I can, I try to introduce visual clues. I try to, so somebody gets a sense. If there's a piece of yellow tape going across a scene, we understand that that's probably a crime scene. And when I was younger, that would have meant that McDonald's sign fell down, but not anymore. So,
all right.
A long answer.
That's great. So Sri from Ohio University says there's a lot of anticipation in photography to get the moment that you envision. So how do you anticipate your shots and sort of do all of the work in making the appropriate lens choices on the fly and all of that kind of thing?
I would tell them first to read The Great Picture Hunt, because that's what it's about. It's about learning to be a good hunter. And, I think understanding human nature, understanding psychology, it's going to help you. It's going to increase your odds of making that picture, of capturing the moment that you anticipate. You have to anticipate something. I don't know. I can't think of a better example. I was telling my students a while back. I said, trying to explain this. I said, imagine, let's just say that your best friend said, I'm going to break up with my boyfriend today, right out in the lunchroom. And as you as a photographer said, well, can I kind of hang back with a long lens and watch? Well, you know something's going to happen. You know there's going to be a response. Either the boyfriend's he's going to be angry, or he's going to be sad. There's going to be some kind of emotional tension there, isn't there? We can anticipate that's going to happen. So if you know where something is going to happen, you might not know exactly what it's going to be, but just a little bit of background, just a little bit of knowing human nature, how we are going to respond is going to help you do that a lot better.
Okay. So one question here is, how do we decide, from David Marks, how do we decide what's truly the most authentic about our own photography?
Well, I mean, let me think. Actually, I'm trying to remember the great quote. It says that every artist dips his brush into his own soul and paints, basically dips his brush into his own soul and paints himself, or something like that. I don't have the quote exactly right. And I think when we talk about being authentic, is, what is it, again, what is your contribution? What do you care the most? What is it that you want to say to other people? What do you want your legacy to be? All those things. And it's, for me, I want people to say when I'm done that, he was kind of a nutty, crazy guy and liked to hug people and could be kind of loud. But you know what? He really had a compassionate heart. It really broke his heart when he saw things that people were being mistreated, or people that need, were lonely, or that needed to be loved. That's my goal. I want to be a compassionate photographer. I want to be a compassionate human being, not just in word, but in deed. And so and so my signature is, again, has been kind of quiet moments. I made choices not to do certain things, and they were hard choices, because there's a lot of kinds of, there's a lot of photography that I really like and that I was pretty good at, but I chose not to do those things. I chose that my authentic person is, I paint gentle sermons with pictures. I want to encourage people to think about relationships with each other, to love each other, to forgive each other, to care about each other. So they're gentle sermons in a sense, and that's what I want it to be. So for you, it might be that, Alex Webb, it's all about color or composition or something. For somebody else, it's all about, peak moments in sports. Everybody has something that really moves them and that they feel like this is their signature.
And that leads really nicely into the question Ben Brewer asked is, what do you think is the most important thing you've said no to in your career?
The hardest one, I'll tell you. If you got time, I'll tell you quickly. Erin and I, we were having our first child, and actually it might have been the second child. It might have been Henry. But I was working on a project in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where I was photographing a lot of the models that Norman Rockwell painted. I had been working on that for a couple of years. I became friends with Doc Campbell, and Doc Campbell was the person who's in most of the pictures you see. He's either giving a shot. Rockwell used him a lot as the doctor picture. And so I spent some time with him, and I became friends with him, and I became friends with his daughter, Betsy. And when Doc Campbell was dying, Betsy called me, and I was in California, and she said, "Dad's dying, and we're having kind of a vigil. Just the family's there around him, and we would like you to be part of that." And I had to say no, because my wife was having a baby any day. I mean, it could have been that day, and it was not an easy decision. And she was even saying, maybe you should go, but I knew I shouldn't go. And I made the right decision, but boy, it hurt me. So saying no that time was really tough. And there's been a couple of times when I have not pressed the shutter when I probably should have, because it was just so quiet. It was such an intense situation, like in a hospital, and life was on the line. And I just felt like even the sound of a shutter would be like, banging two pans together. It would just be too much of an intrusion. So I didn't fire the shutter. And sometimes I wish I would have, Oh, well.
So Jennifer Moore, who teaches up at the University of Minnesota Duluth, wants to know how you talk to students or others about the distinction between saying making a picture and taking a picture.
Yeah, those are, I mean, those are really interchangeable terms, but I do use the term making a picture because what, you know, when we say that, we're saying that there's more thought to it, that you really are, you're being, you know, you're being an artist, you're being a composer. It's not, you know, you're just not grabbing something out of thin air. Whereas taking a picture, you know, again, has the connotation of stealing, of, you know, I'm robbing. You know, we would often think, you know, with the Native Americans, people in other cultures, they believe that maybe you're stealing something from them, stealing their spirit. So, but well, I would say that connected to that, that one of the secrets that I have tried to impart to my students, when they ask me, they'll say, "Mr. LaBelle, how do people let you make such intimate pictures of them?" And I said, the way this happens is I realize that I'm not taking anything from there, but I'm giving them something. What I'm saying to them is, I validate you, I honor you, that I'm saying that your life is important and you're important. And they recognize that very quickly. I learned that in the book Lessons in Death and Life. That was one of the principles that I learned there. Really was that, you know, if we believe in what we're doing, if we understand that what we're doing is good and right, then that's going to give us a lot of freedom to go forward and a lot of liberty. And it sort of removes the shackles from us that, you know, that inhibit us from making those kind of pictures. And a lot of people think that they think I go too far. They think I go too quickly. They think I get too close to people with a camera. I don't think I do. I mean, I'm not saying there's not times I do, but I'm going in there understanding that people, if they feel that they're being seen and they feel like they're being honored and they feel like they're being validated, they understand that, they appreciate that. They don't think I'm taking anything. They thank me because I'm giving them something. And it's a big difference in this world between believing that you're giving something and believing that you're taking something.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Maybe this answers Kirk Chandler's question then too, about how do you draw the line between being curious and being intrusive?
You know, that line's different for every person. And I can't, you know, you have to tell me that. I mean, I can read body language. If, you know, somebody can stick their middle finger up and I can realize they don't want me there, or they can, you know, threaten me with a baseball bat. And those are pretty obvious signs that you're intruding and I don't want you there. But you don't always know that unless somebody communicates that to you. You don't know if you're intruding. You know, sometimes I think we err on the other side. I think we err on the side of thinking we're intruding, and therefore we don't make the intimate pictures we should be making because we think we're. I don't believe that. I think that
I agree.
when somebody tells me, you know, if I'm too close, then tell me I'm too close. Tell me with your eyes. Tell me with your body language. Tell me with your words. When I go to scenes that are really difficult, and I've photographed many scenes where people have died, young people have died, you know, car wrecks, funerals. I make eye contact with people and they tell me by their eyes whether I'm welcome or not. I don't have to ask them. I don't have to go up and say, "Can I make your picture?" I look at them, they look at me, and there's a communication there that's very strong.
So Gina asks, what ethical choices do you make when you photograph? Is there a situation you wouldn't photograph?
I think as I've aged and I've become more mature in my understanding of journalism, I'm probably more likely to be careful in how images are shared. Sometimes the subjects don't have any idea what the publication of their image is going to do and the impact it's going to have. They don't even understand it. We understand that. Sometimes even though we understand it, we want to share it because we want to win an award or we want to get someone with the praises of something. So we published it anyway. I'm much more sensitive about that now, about where images are shared and how they're shared. You know, so I don't know if I don't have a great answer for that. I think when it's an individual decision, always.
I think that was really interesting. One of our local photographers who did a television documentary, said he and the reporter went back and sat down with some of the subjects before they released it and sort of sat
Right.
down and talk to them about what was going to happen
Right.
when this came out, and how, they needed to sort of, and because these were little elementary school kids, right? And so sat down with them and their parents and really talked about sort of what the public reaction might be. And so I think that's.
I can tell you a real example. I mean, I'm trying to not give it away too much. When I was in California, there was a drive-by shooting. Somebody was killed. Somebody saw it. One of the photographers went back to where they had put up a little memorial. There were some flowers and stuff, and this young man was there by the memorial, looking at the memorial, and the photographer made a picture of them and got his name and everything, and then published it. And the next day, the mother called, and I mean, just distraught, and she said, "You just signed the death warrant for my son. My son saw what happened. Nobody knew who he was until we have this picture of him at this memorial now. So you can imagine the danger he's in now because of what somebody didn't think that through." I wasn't on the desk that day, but someone didn't think that through of what this could mean, what the publication of this person who had seen what happened, by even saying that, how it could jeopardize their life. So again, as the more time we spend in journalism, the more situations that we've been put in, we should have a greater wisdom on how photographs are used, how they're shared. And I'm not saying that we back off and we become timid and not publish real photographs. I'm still a great believer in publishing truth and real photographs, but I'm also a believer in putting them in context. When we published, when I was at the Post-Gazette, I published the picture, of the man who leaped from the Trade Center, or, he was going upside down, basically committing suicide. And I ran it in on the back side. I ran a full page, but on the back side of the newspaper, because I didn't want it on the front page where some kid walking by the news rack could see that. I felt like, that would be a choice that a parent would make, or somebody that actually spent some time in the newspaper inside would see. So it was a tough decision. I felt like it needed to be shared, but I had to put it in context.
Great. So we have a couple of related student questions. Abigail asks, she says, "I'm a young student photojournalist. How do I figure out what kind of storyteller I want to be? There's so many different types of stories out there, and I feel as if there's a lot of pressure to choose a specialty."
Yep. I would tell you right now is get a piece of paper and make a list. And make that on that list, what do I care about? What do I really care about in this world? And from that list, you're going to find the stories that you need. If you care about, if global warming is what you really care about, if pollution is what you really care about, if domestic violence is what you really care about, whatever it is that really moves you, that you feel like you want to have a voice and you want to share, that's where you start. That's the list you make. That way it's authentic. You're not trying to do something because you think it'll win awards and everybody will look at it. And believe me, our business is full of that. It's, we're overwhelmed by people who chase certain stories because they're visually loaded, because it's the low fruit everybody's seen. But I admire the stories of people that said, I did this because I really believed in it. I mean, I think of Salgado's work of the gold mines and stuff. I mean, people do things that they really believe in. And so, I say again, it's one of those things I give my students. I'll say, what if I came to you and I said, I'm going to give you $100,000 to photograph whatever you believe in and whatever you want? You'd be surprised at how many people can't figure that out. They'd say, I don't know what I would do. Well, then you need to go back and have some talks with yourself and do a little soul searching about why you're on this earth and what do you care about. And, because that's what we're using. These are tools that we have, the words that we have, the cameras that we use, those are tools to express the things that we believe are important to us. If I could write poetry, I'd probably write poetry. If I could, if I could reach people more deeply with that, I would probably use that tool. So that's what, again, they're tools. They're tools to enlighten people, I believe, to make our world better and so that we have a better understanding of each other.
So speaking of poetry, Alex asks, what advice would you give to a recent graduate who's wanting to combine photography and writing to tell stories, but doesn't know how best to do that yet for a career?
I would start off, I mean, in this era, I would start by writing your own blog every day. You know, you can have a free blog on WordPress, which is what I'm doing. And, you know, you start writing what you feel, you start photographing what you feel, because you're different than me. You're different than everybody. You're an individual. You know, nobody wants somebody who's just going to parrot what everybody else is doing. We don't, you know, I think we want authentic thinking. We want authentic feelings. And so you can do that right now. And if, as you're doing that, you might discover kind of who you are a little more in the process. Start writing what you care about. Start making pictures right now. You don't have, you know, you can be published immediately online now. We couldn't do that, you know, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. So there's tremendous opportunity now. And then I would say, look at, look at the work of other people that do the things that you like to do, that you believe in, and see how they're doing, and send them a note and say, okay, you're an underwater photographer. How did you get there? You know, or you shoot, you know, rock climbing pictures. How did you get there? How did you get your start? And most of those people would be willing to give you the time and tell you how they did it. I can only tell you, I've learned a long time ago to not talk about things I don't know anything about. I can't teach you what I don't know, but the things that I know about, I'm glad to share.
Okay. Joan McKinney asks, if you could change anything you've done in your photography life, what would it be?
Hi, Joan. Glad you're following. If I could change any of it, I think I would have worked on being a better writer earlier in my life. I just lacked confidence. It was so difficult for me. I was so insecure with writing. I wish I would have done that earlier, because I think it would have helped my photography. It would have helped me organize my photography better, my thoughts better. I think it really retarded my growth. It harmed me because I didn't have the confidence. I wasn't using words as well as I should have been using them when I was young. And so I don't know. I mean, Joan probably knows. A lot of people probably know that I believe that all of what I've done in photography has really been training to for what I'm going to be doing in the future. I hope, Lord willing, I live long enough. I have plans that I want to use photography for. And I think everything I've done up to now is those things are going to help me do this better. So I don't know if there's any one thing in the past, I mean, I wish, we can always wish these things. I wish I would have went to the University of Missouri when I was 19 or 20 years old. I wish I would have known about that. I wish I could have afforded. I wish I had the confidence. But then what do I trade? What I trade is who I am. All those times that I've fallen down and cut myself and hurt myself, and all those mistakes are, kind of make me who I am, and make me better able to help other people. So it's a trade-off.
I think there's been this weird idea that photographers can't write. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think there's a lot of photographers who, if they'd been encouraged to write, would have been, or could still be great writers.
Of course. Yeah. I always go back to, I think I got, nicked pretty early. I think I was in 3rd grade when the teacher asked us to write a story about, she was talking about active verbs and things. And she said, I want you to write about a rabbit going across the road, the yard. And I said, the rabbit tore across the road. And she goes, a rabbit doesn't tear across a road. He could run, he can jump. And I thought, oh, I thought he was tearing.
Okay. Cindy Schultz wants to know, are you called to document the changes in your community as a result of the coronavirus? If so, what precautions are you taking, and is it changing your approach to picture making?
I would say no, I'm not called to be photographing what here. First of all, a lot of people are doing that already. I don't think I'm helping anything. I don't think I'm advancing the cause by doing this right now. I think, if anything, I feel overwhelmed by the coverage of the coronavirus. I think I see a lot of pictures and a lot of specials, and I'm trying to avoid talking about it a little bit. And the reason I say it is because everybody else is doing it. My doing it is not going to advance this cause one little bit. Now, if I can talk about human stories along the way if I run into people that are dealing with this, then I want to try to tell those stories. But I don't need to launch into that. I'm not that kind of person at this point. It's not going to help me. Not going to help the community as far as I think. In a small way, I'm probably doing more by just writing this gratitude journal every day that I do. I think that is, by the notes I'm getting from people, that seems to be encouraging them more than if I showed pictures of people with masks on and, all the things that I'm seeing in the community that are kind of hard.
Which leads to Gina's question. How do they find your blog?
Well, the one blog is, it's bridgesandangels.wordpress.com. Bridges and Angels, and so I decided when I asked my students at Campbellsville to start keeping a gratitude journal. That was one of their assignments. And whenever I give the assignment to the students, I try to do the same thing. I just feel like I'm not going to ask them to do something I'm not going to do. So I started as well. And so I said I would do it for 50 days. And so I'm on day 15, or today's will be day 16. And what I'd ask them to do is just tell me how you're feeling. What do you see? What do you feel? What are you learning? And it doesn't have to be complicated. And so that's kind of what I'm doing every day. And I try to I use a portion of it on Facebook kind of as a trigger to the other. But the blog is where I carry all of it.
So the last question here is from Deborah Fisher Goldstein, and she's wondering if you can give us some more details about therapy and photography, the course you're working on, and maybe some examples.
Well, I think the goal of it is to fill ourselves with good. If I was going to use a base for it, the base is Philippians, the 4th chapter, basically, when the Apostle Paul wrote and said, whatsoever things are lovely and are of good report, and are just and true. If you think on these things, there's a really important lesson in that. When that was written, this person was in prison, not being able to do what he wanted to be doing. It was, confined, imprisoned, facing death, and yet said, you want to know how to overcome this? Think on good things. Celebrate the things in life that are important, that are positive. So that is sort of the core of this class is, let's use our camera to express the things that are positive. Let's celebrate the things that are good. Let's photograph people that are doing good things and that are helping people. Let's photograph things that we think are lovely, that we're thankful for. That really is the core of that class.
Okay, great. Well, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up here? I just appreciate everything. And there's been a lot of sort of thank yous in the chat here. I'm sorry if I missed people's questions. They were coming in on both the chat and the Q&A. So hopefully we got to the gist of all of that.
My final thought to all of you is that if you're listening, realize that your life is important. Realize that you can really make a difference to other people's lives. It's easy to sit back and say, what talent do I have? I can't write, I can't photograph, I can't. You can do so much. You can do so much to create a positive atmosphere and to help other people. And photography and writing, gosh, they're such wonderful, wonderful gifts to be able to do that with. I can't imagine anything else in my life, a different career. I mean, I would have liked to have been a baseball player, but that probably would have been really self-serving. Plus I would have had splinters on my backside, sitting on the bench all the time.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. I just really appreciate it. And
thank you, Gina, for doing this.
So anyway, stay safe, and we will bring you to Minnesota in the fall and get our hugs then.
Good.
So
I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay, good, because I feel cheated.
Yeah, me too. Well,
all right, everybody. We are signing off from this session. In 15 minutes, we'll be back with, you can make the choice of the various breakouts. You find it on the northernexposuremn.org schedule page. And we hope to see you again here in a few minutes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Oh, I got to get a picture of you there.
Okay.